the solar panels would not open.
Right.
You were in Florida or somewhere, you had on shorts, and they put you on a private plane and flew you to Pennsylvania where it was snow and ice, because you had to go to a library to get a paper which had some either measurements or something, diagrams or something that were needed. Okay. And you were gone for 3 days, and you didn't even tell me you were going. I didn't know where you were, what happened to you.
You're combining two stories.
Well, tell one of them.
Okay. well, we had a lot to do with Skylab, because I was working in what was called the materials lab.
Okay.
And the materials lab was responsible for a lot of the materials that were used on Skylab. And so that's why, and see, after I left the headquarters building, and that's when, remember I told you that after 1 year working in the headquarters building, I had to find a laboratory to go to work. Mm. And so I went down to the materials laboratory. And this is right when Skylab was getting going. And the lab directors thought I would do better in the projects office, which was more versatile. Mm. And so I worked in the projects office during that Skylab thing. But what happened is that blends into Apollo 16, where I told you that during Apollo 14, when they did an electrophoresis experiment, it really kind of bombed out. Mm-hmm. When the guy who had been in charge of it didn't want to work on it anymore. So we had a chance of doing another electrophoresis experiment on Apollo 16. Yes. And since I was in the projects office, I had wide latitude in funding and so on and so forth. And my boss, Bill Johnson, knew the graduate dean at University of Virginia, mm-hmm. named Bob Coulthall. And he was the one that helped me with getting my PhD and so on and so forth. So Bill Johnson knew that Bob Coulthall was in charge of an organization called the University Space Research Association. And that was started by the National Academy of Sciences to provide scientists that would tell NASA how best to use the rocks that were coming back from the moon. Oh. Where they should be sent and how they would be analyzed. And the University Space Research Association had, again, a wide open thing. Any scientist that NASA or other scientists said would be best for analyzing those rocks would be brought on as an advisor. Hmm. So my boss and Bob Coulthall had been together at graduate school. I do remember that, Wake Forest. And Bill Johnson, my ex-boss, said, well, why don't you call Bob Coulthall and have him get a committee together to tell you how to do Apollo 16? Because Apollo 14 kind of bombed.
Mm-hmm. The electrophoresis.
The electrophoresis.
Right, so the electrophoresis. And what Bob Coulthall said, I don't know anything about electrophoresis, but why don't you, find out who the experts were? And so that's when Julie thing of going to the library, and I looked up all the people who wrote about electrophoresis. I know, separate. This is separate. Yeah. And so I found out the names of 6 people who had done recent research in electrophoresis. So I called them. I said, well, would you be interested in helping me figure out what to do on a space experiment? And of course, they all agreed, also because everybody had paid. So they came to Huntsville and they recommended how to do it. And they said the best thing to do is use model materials. And one of the guys was the inventor of polystyrene latex, which are the little beads of polystyrene and that are used all over the world now. And he had the patents from Lehigh on it, and so he was one of the guys. And they recommended, well, let's do standard particles. and see how they do with electrophoresis. That was Vanderhoff. And so they got together, since the Lehigh guy was not in Pennsylvania, so he was near the GE, so they really worked together on building that hardware.
Hmm.
And so I'd go to GE also, and so on and so forth, to see how they were doing. We'd have committee meetings up there. Gosh, the hardware was really good.
Hmm.
And the way NASA did things, and especially these experiments, there would always be a quality engineer who kept the hardware. And NASA quality was very critical for getting things on board space. NASA quality had to look at all the paperwork.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll show you, if you're interested, I've got a notebook of the paperwork the quality engineer had on Apollo 16. It's amazing.
I'd love to see that.
It's amazing.
Oh, that's...
And he had to say, this is okay. When we'd go down the Cape, the NASA quality guy down in Florida would say, well, I don't know if this hardware is acceptable for space. And Cecil Seaver was his name. Cecil says, well, I'm quality too. And they had their little stamps so they could prove to each other they were quality. And it was very rigorous.
Mm-hmm.
So the hardware came down, and it was 3 days before launch. No, it was a week before launch. And Cecil would check the hardware, which was in a clean room. He said, the hardware's leaking.
Mm. That's a problem.
And this is where Cecil and I were supposed to take the hardware down to the Cape.
Okay.
Because they'd have to do all their things to make sure it would get into where the astronauts were, the command module.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was ready to go to the Cape. So all I had were short pants and short sleeves, and so that's when Julie said.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I had to go to Philadelphia.
Because they needed you to intervene on the Skylab.
To go back to GE because they'd screwed up on the hardware.
Oh, so you screwed up on the hardware. So this doesn't have anything to do with Skylab. This is just to
our
address
hardware was leaking.
the electrophoresis.
And it had bubbles in it, and it wouldn't work.
Gotcha.
So all of a sudden, I got on a plane for Philadelphia with my short pants
and it was
shirt.
So literally same day. You need to get on this plane.
You could do
Go.
that. You know, you could just get on the plane in those days. Just getting an airplane ticket.
When did you realize you hadn't told Julie you were headed there?
Oh, well, let me finish. I'm getting to that. So I arrived in Philadelphia, and we went right out to the GE place, and they took a look at it, and they said, well, it's leaking at Lexan, at these screw holes in the Lexan. And the GE place at Valley Forge said, well, that's a GE material. And the GE people in Schenectady developed this. And it's a brand new plastic, and we thought it would be just right for this.
Mm.
And we went right into the lab, and all of a sudden Julie called the hotel down in Florida where I had reservations.
Yeah.
And I hadn't shown up, and she called my boss over at the lab, and this guy over at the lab, his name was Schwinghammer. A hard nut guy, said, oh, he's in Philadelphia.
Oh, jeez.
And that night I had to call her.
Yeah.
But she didn't know where the hell it was. And the GE guy called the inventor of Lexan, a polycarbonate, to come down and say what was wrong with their plastic. Oh, it was a big, big deal.
Yeah.
And what happened is in hindsight, clear, when they drilled the holes for attaching it, they didn't anneal the material. So the screws put stresses.
Yeah.
And our solution was somewhat electrolytic. It was something, it had I think a base material. Basic rather than acidic. But it was enough to cause corrosion at the screws.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, at those screw holes, it developed cracks, and the liquid came out of those screw holes. So they came down that weekend. They machined whole new parts, annealed them, put it all together, and on, I don't know what day of the week this was maybe a Monday or Tuesday, then I flew commercial back to Huntsville.
With the
and
parts.
with the assembled piece of equipment, with the quality guy. The quality guy is with me the whole way. And we got down to Huntsville, and the flight was the next day.
You're talking the Apollo 16
The Apollo
flight.
16 was the next day, and the deputy of the center met me at the plane, and he says, "I've got a private plane in Hazel Green. The only other plane we could find is a private plane. We're going to fly down to the Cape with that private plane, and we can still get it into the command module." Especially if you've got your quality guy, and he says that you've done everything right. So we flew down there. You could see the thing up there.
It's all mounted.
And so on and so forth. And I said, and we landed and got the hardware out to the launch site.
So you're walking up to this towering rocket.
They wouldn't let me do that.
Oh, okay.
But we were at the base of the vehicle.
Yeah, yeah.
But then the people with the white coats and so on and so forth, they took it on.
And this is one of those Saturn rockets.
This is the Saturn, the big
huge.
one. That was neat.
That's awesome.
But Julie,
so how close were you to
had Schwinghammer. You had to talk to Schwinghammer, didn't you?
No, finally I got so upset. I called his office and they said, "Oh, we don't blah 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 blah." I said, "I'm not getting off the phone until you tell me where my husband is, if he's alive."
Oh, jeez.